Morning, everyone. And I can see clearly we're all a little bit out of practice with burning the candle at both ends. So thank you for getting up and brushing down and looking so bright and breezy. So this is going to be an interesting hybrid experience. So do we have our panelists joining us? Yes? As if by magic. So who have we got? We've got Alan, we've got Misha, and we've got Nick. Morning.
Hi guys.
Morning.
How are we?
Morning.
Nick, we're all very, very excited about what sort of child's toy you're going to incentivize us with today.
I'll definitely make an offer at the end.
Fantastic. So Katie asked us to talk about the value that major events bring. We sort of talked about this and we thought, okay, so the first thing we need to really ask ourselves is value to whom? And when you really, really drill down, there are only two people or two groups that major events provide value to. One is the community, the broader community. You know, you might want to consider this legacy. The other one is shareholders. You could argue that it's important to keep fans, give value to fans, but at the end of the day, the shareholders want to keep the fans coming so that they can improve the bottom line. So what we're going to do is we're going to talk a little bit about those two groups and how major events provide value to them. So I've got an esteemed panel with me this morning. I'm not going to introduce them and take you through their CV because there's an excellent profile on each of them, and taking them through the CV would take the 45 minutes that we've got. So, John, morning. If I could start with you, and if we can think about the value which major events bring to the community, I've been particularly impressed about the diversity and the general value as far as legacy is concerned, that the emphasis that you've been putting on for the Rugby League World Cup. So can you explain a little bit more about that strategy and how your World Cup is going to add value to the broader community?
Yeah, thanks, Andy. That's very kind, and very happy to share some of our experiences. Our journey began way back in 2015, convincing UK government to support us, setting up a company. We are a special purpose vehicle. We exist for one purpose, which is delivering the tournament, not in 2021 anymore, unfortunately in 2022. But our purpose, what we exist for is to make a positive impact on people's lives. And we've approached this perhaps differently to other people. We don't like the word legacy. Legacy is what we will leave behind. What we are providing at the moment is social impact. And we've designed a programme that isn't per se about convincing more people to play the sport of rugby league. We have three different initiatives. One is an accessible volunteer programme. We've partnered with a social care provider, community integrated care, who are doing amazing things with people with a learning disability, intellectual disability, and it is so far removed from the sport of rugby league, gardening, photography, inspiring people, and they are going to be our volunteers during the tournament. The second area is around facilities, and this is intrinsically linked to the sport. We've received some money from government, but we've tried to make that go as far as we can to make sure that there is an indelible footprint as part of the legacy afterwards, and it provides more welcoming environments for people to play the sport. And then the third area is around engagement, which is multifaceted, a cultural programme, a big education programme, and perhaps the marquee element of that is a mental fitness programme. And we actually designed that before the pandemic, which was around resilience for young adults. And of course now, with what we've all experienced during the pandemic, it's probably more relevant than ever before. So it was a slightly different take on using a major event to make a positive impact on people's lives and engage with people that we wouldn't normally engage with in our towns and cities, a big commitment towards social mobility. It's quite startling that where you are born has such an impact on your quality of life, and we just want to make sure with the opportunities that we've got and another 12 months that we do genuinely make a difference.
And I'm intrigued to know how you're going to measure that.
Yeah, it's a really good question. We set out some time ago, I mean, measuring quantitative things, the number of people that will participate in the game thereafter is very straightforward. Measuring experiences and measuring qualitative aspects is very difficult. And about 2 years ago, we got all of the best brains that we could in a room, and they said, gosh, this is really hard. But we've actually come up with a methodology. We're really interested to use that now in measuring those experiences. And hopefully what we learn, we want to then pass on to other people that will go on and develop that model so we can measure that quality of experience. And ultimately, major sports events are about creating memories. And we know that we'll create some amazing memories. We want to capture those and also measure those as well.
And that's intriguing and really encouraging to hear. So is that a methodology that you're prepared to share with other rights holders?
Absolutely. We've got partners in UK Sport, Sport England, the Department for Culture, Digital Media and Sport. We've got a significant amount of public funding. So everything that we do, we of course want to share. And we don't just want to wait to the end to share it. We're very happy to share things as we go along. We will not get everything right. But I think the industry, what's really struck me about the last couple of years is people in the industry really coming together, being prepared to share more, and that is a force for the good. I want nothing more than our event in 22, that when it comes to the Rugby League World Cup in 25, that's bigger and better than ours, and in 29, and so on. And that's definitely taking the view that we don't have all the answers, but what we're doing hopefully is innovating and hopefully in some respects trailblazing.
Brilliant, thanks, John. And Paul, you have a take on legacy spin and adding value from a major event, don't you?
Yeah, so we build digital twins of venues, and through the pandemic, we've had a couple of international federations come to us saying, can you build a digital twin of X venue? We will utilize that to plan. And the one example I can give is the Belgrade Arena. At the time, it was a COVID hospital, so this particular international federation was not even able to enter the building. So we built a digital asset of it, and we really built it for operational purposes, so people can do all their operational planning in this digital asset from wherever they are. So planning what the signage looks like, how emergency evacuations will work, how the whole venue will be configured. But what we've actually kind of then realised is that the International Federation are able to work with that venue and hand over that digital asset to the venue, who can then commercialise it, so they can use it to show spectators what the view from the seat will look like, what the route is in and out of the venues, showing what hospitality suites look like. So it's a real example there of where, like a major event, an international federation, their kind of innovation has then given a legacy for that local venue, and has really enabled them to not only benefit commercially, but there's also the carbon footprint saving of that. And most of our products and things that are bought, they generally get paid for out of travel budgets, because they're reducing the cost of travelling, and that's how they're paying for it. And they've got a really, really good story to tell as well around the kind of carbon footprint saving. So it's really, really good to be able to kind of like hand over that, and we're working with Paris 2024 as well. They're looking at introducing those into their venue use agreements. So they're negotiating the cost down of venue use agreements by handing over digital assets, which those venues can then use afterwards. And that's a great thing. They exist forever. You can kind of change them and move them. So kind of really, really good opportunity in how we can look at technology legacy, as well as kind of some of the physical legacies and the community legacies, which was mentioned earlier. And
are we going to illustrate that with a video, perhaps?
Yeah, I think there's a short video, nice little segue in there. Yeah, is that coming now, I think? So we're going to just show you a little short video of a digital twin that we have built of the IBEC Arena in LA. This will be the new home of the LA Clippers. I'll just see if it's going to come forward. Okay. This is a digital twin of the IBEC Arena. It opens up in 4 years' time. The new home of the LA Clippers. The owner of the LA Clippers is Steve Baumer, former CEO of Microsoft. As you're watching this video, there is something very unusual about all the hospitality suites. I'll ask later on if anyone can kind of spot what that is. But essentially, the client's able to go in there. They're making design decisions about this venue. So Steve Baumer has walked from where he'll park his car all the way through into his venue, and he's sat in his seat. He's actually changed the colour of all the seats. He's made decisions on how high the halo is in the building and actually designed that building. They can pick up anything in this environment, the chairs, the tables, the assets, move it all around. And now we have the sales and marketing team who are actually selling these assets, and they're also selling the brand rights for this venue as well. So they're talking to a couple of kind of key partners with that. But they're able themselves to put those brand assets onto that digital environment and then go out to sell that. So it's not a render, it's an actual digital twin. So this here is kind of simulating all those lights individually. If we need to change the lighting, we actually have to go into the digital twin, take out the light bulb and replace it with another one. So it's not just a render, it's an actual kind of true twin of that venue.
Thanks, Paul. Brilliant. Fascinating. Right, so if we get our colleagues back from around the world. Okay, guys, I'd like to bring you in now. John was talking about social impact and the way that a major event can resonate across the community and indeed across the world if you're talking about inspiring people to play a particular sport. Do any of you want to comment or give an example of where you've seen social impact or legacy spinning out of a major event?
Well, kia ora, I'm happy to start. It's Nick Sortner from Auckland and Eden Park. I mentioned yesterday in relation to the 3 Women's World Cups over the next 2 years, and this provides a genuine opportunity for gender equality. We've taken a leadership position in relation to those events, and the commercial terms aren't necessarily in line what you would have seen with a Men's Rugby World Cup, but we understood the importance of securing those 3 events. And as a result of securing those 3 events, we've been able to attract central government funding to see our bathrooms, as an example, being renovated to be gender equal. So this will enable, when the All Blacks are playing at Eden Park, then the Black Ferns to have equal facilities at the venue. And we no longer refer to the Black Ferns as a curtain raiser, we're playing double headers. So it's even the terminology we're seeing changing. Believe it or not, the FIFA Women's World Cup will be the biggest event New Zealand will ever see. We'll have 1.4 billion watching the opening fixture from Eden Park. So that puts it in perspective how far women's sport has come. And that's wonderful to see, not only as a father of 2 young daughters, but to just see that inclusion and diversity of content now coming through the park. And the other point I just wanted to raise was just in relation to COVID and some of the changes that now we're seeing as a legacy out of our first lockdown. There's no doubt that the escapism that sport and entertainment provides, but also it's actually accelerated some change in our operations. So introducing in our food and beverage outlets, click and collect, or indeed seeing the increases the convenience for our patrons and new innovation being implemented. So out of adversity, there's also legacy.
Brilliant. Okay. Alan, I'd like to bring you in now, and let's turn our attention to adding value to shareholders. Value is added to shareholders by improving the bottom line, and that comes down to improved revenues. Revenues we know come from broadcast predominantly in major events, then sponsorship, then match day revenues. And within match day revenues, I'm including hospitality, obviously. Alan, if we focus on the broadcast side of things with you and your forthcoming World Cup in France, you're doing deals now, you're thinking about OTT. How is your major event driving value to your stakeholders as World Rugby?
Yeah, look, hi, good morning, Andy. Good morning, everybody. Greetings from Paris. I'm sorry I can't be at Anfield with you, particularly as an ardent Liverpool fan, but 2 days away from, 1 day away, I should say, tomorrow, from 2 years to go to that Rugby World Cup that Andy just mentioned in France in 2023. And absolutely, you're right in terms of driving value. I mean, and we've sort of talked a little bit about the question of who we're driving value for. And for us, exactly to your point, Andy, is a lot about why we're trying to drive that value. And we're trying to drive that value and grow those revenues because we want to invest more in our sport. We want to invest more, in our case, in the growth of rugby. And, as the game grows and as we develop the sport, there are more mouths to feed, and more mouths to feed means pressure to create more revenues. And as you quite rightly say, Andy, a lot of those revenues, are driven by our ability to monetize the broadcast and media rights for the event. And actually, really importantly for us, and as a good current example, we just announced the renewal of a really significant partnership here in France with TF1, our long-term broadcast partner, free-to-air broadcast partner, but a free-to-air broadcast partner with huge reach now, and not just traditional reach, but digital reach and reach beyond the sort of traditional live programming that we would drive out of an event like a Rugby World Cup. So, when we're thinking about maximising value from a broadcast and media relationship, of course, we need to maximise the revenue value of that. We need to make sure that, again, as an organisation, we're growing the revenues that we're going to reinvest in the growth of the sport. But we also need to think about how we are using that relationship to maximise a different type of value, which is back to growing audiences. And, you mentioned the communities and audiences around sport, and they are ultimately what we're trying to grow alongside participation that allows us to continue to grow as an event. And so reaching broader audiences with our big events, and we know that the big events, in our case, the Rugby World Cups, the Rugby Sevens competitions in Olympic Games, they are the big opportunities to really grow audiences beyond our very traditional kind of strongholds and traditional demographics. So again, looking forward to Rugby World Cup in 2023, but reflecting on a really successful Rugby World Cup back in 2019 in Japan. How do we take what we learned from Japan and start to deliver an even better and bigger experience and deliver that maximum value for 2023? And again, we know that it's not just about maximising that live content. You've only got to look at the way, I guess, us all being at home in pandemics has just driven the growth of streaming services. And in the sports context, you look at the success of everything from The Last Dance to Drive to Survive to all of the Amazon kind of all or nothing shows, to see that you can do a lot more with your content than just the live content, and you can therefore do a lot more with your big event than just the live content. And that's really where our plans are focused right now. And exciting times.
And my perception is that rights holders are taking increasing control of their destiny. There was a time 10, 15 years ago where broadcast rights were just sold to a sports marketing agency. That sports marketing agency then went out and disseminated, sold, and made a margin. That then moved to increasing control of selling your own rights, Premier League being a perfect example, doing it yourself. Are you planning to do any business to consumer, a B2C type streaming, whereby you have a direct connection with your fans, as opposed to allowing the rights to be sold to broadcasters and then monetized that way?
Yeah, no, and the answer is definitely yes. And again, it's different, I guess, for different of our big events. I mean, Nick just mentioned Rugby World Cup in New Zealand in our women's competition. That's got a different type of footprint with our broadcast partners, for example, than the Men's World Cup will have here in France. There's an opportunity to take great rugby content to consumers in a slightly different way. And ultimately, I think there's a shift, exactly as you're describing, Andy, towards, as a rights holder, really, if you're going to continue to build your relationship with consumers and continue to build the opportunities that creates, then you have to own that relationship more. And so we've got to get closer to the consumers ourselves. And as you say, that's more of a B2C than a B2B relationship. And there's definitely a shift in that direction for all of us.
And John, same question to you. You now got an extra year that you didn't expect to have to plan. How are you going to use that year? Are you going to have more streaming opportunities?
Yeah, absolutely. We're obviously different to Alan. We are an event. We have a short term, slightly longer now than we had hoped for. But we've always tried to look at different opportunities. We've actually acquired the international broadcast rights from the International Federation, and that allows us to do more. So whether it is direct to consumer, whether it's to package some of the LED inventory that we've got and put those into broadcast, whatever that is, obviously with 12 more months, we've got more opportunity to do that.
Thanks. Misha, I'd like to bring you in now. So if we're talking about adding value to shareholders, new revenue streams, Mediacom, experts at working with brands and on the sponsorship side, What value do you bring to the stakeholders via sponsorship, and how is sponsorship changing, in your opinion? How is it going to change in the next year or two?
Well, I think we're seeing Andy, a huge shift, in my opinion. I've been in the industry for a long time, and you know what many of us around this conversation, and maybe people in the audience, what we're used to is this idea of, you know, sponsorship being a big driver of awareness, consideration, and, you know, very in most cases very media driven. You know, particularly as it relates to major events. Clients, brands want to be seen and be part of these big sort of tentpole moments, exciting moments in people's lives. And what we've noticed, and what we're continuing, this is where the industry is shifting over the last sort of 18 months, 24 months, is you know, this complete change in dynamic in terms of priorities. You know, we heard earlier about the priority being sort of social, of major events as well, social impact, purpose, making a difference, and that's exactly what we're seeing on the brand side, on the brand side as well. I think in the past, you would have something in the sort of a bucket of CSR, let's call it, and I think that's what it was, and it was almost, you know, it's set separately. It was almost a bit of an afterthought, a bit of an add-on. You just kind of do a few things in the community, and that, you know, and that was that. Where now that dynamic has completely shifted. I mean, those, you know, purpose, making a difference, social impact is very much top of the agenda, because every single advertiser in the world, perhaps accelerated through the pandemic, understands that they have a role to play, and they expect not even just a role. There's an expectation from consumers that they do more than just advertise and compete with others in their category on product and price. Everything today, for most part, is commoditized, right? You can go to any bank, you can buy any car, you can fly any airline. There isn't a great deal of difference between these types of goods or services, and the difference. So, you know, which then means that the difference is, what are these companies doing to actually make a difference to the types of things that matter to people, right? So how are they leveraging the power of marketing, power of their, you know, Coca-Cola, let's say, to bring about positive change, particularly for young people? That's the big trend that we're seeing. Young people, Gen Z, they're much more connected to companies they feel are aligned with them values-wise, and are doing things to make a world in which they live a better place, whether that's environment or equality and so on. So very, very, very interesting, and a very big shift over the last sort of 2 years.
So the brand's almost using the event as a conduit to be seen to be providing some social impact. Correct.
I mean, it's a prerequisite. I don't think that used to be. I mean, in my memory, that didn't used to be the case. Sure, there was something about leaving a legacy and so on, but mostly it was about how do we drive conversation, how do we make sure that we are we have top of mind awareness. And I'm not saying that those things don't matter. They do, but they see the dynamic changing. They understand that that these events are also an opportunity to show the world what they represent and what they stand for, and what we're seeing as these things are happening, and not necessarily just around major events, but what we're seeing is when brands are leaning in to purpose, they're seeing substantial growth in business outcomes. So we know that this isn't some sort of idealistic area that we're trying to get into. There are benefits to the bottom line.
Yeah, it comes back to authenticity, doesn't it? If you're doing it as a brand, it's potentially a bit false, but if you're doing it through a sport, then there's more authenticity there. Nick, absolutely. Alan, any additional thoughts on sponsorship value and driving value through sponsorship from your experience?
I think that's a very valid point in terms of the old days of a sign on the fence, being a partner of a venue is gone. There's no doubt that there's a value in having the sign on the fence and the association of two premium brands. But there's a number of initiatives that we couldn't have brought to the table without our partners. So to be able to go to a partner and talk to them about mobility and accessibility and understand that we're a wheelchair bay. Most people who come in a wheelchair have issues with circulation. So to have a comfort zone where it's brought to you by a partner and there's heating, and it actually makes the patrons who already have some challenges in making their way to a stadium have a premium experience, is something that we've now partnered with brands and brought empathetic lens to their brand. And we've done that in a number of areas at the park, whereby we've seen partners come on board supporting initiatives that are social enterprise or social good. And then that links into the broader partnership with the park.
Thanks. And John, Kazoo, your naming rights partner, so they haven't just done it from altruistic reasons. They haven't just done it to support you and social impact. What else are they getting out of their sponsorship of the Rugby League World Cup?
Probably wider than just that, Andy. We've now got 13 partners, and almost every deal's been predicated on exactly the discussion. Yes, visibility, but much more around social benefit, around what they stand for, and using this as an opportunity with an event, particularly in the north of England, to show that a difference can be made. The world was changing before the pandemic. The pandemic, I think, has accelerated change, ethical decision-making, the exponential growth in digital, but particularly from a brand and a sponsorship perspective. And I think we'll see many new deals made predicated on social impact.
Yeah, brilliant. So that's a consistent message that we're getting. Alan, something that a leitmotif that comes through every single conversation that I have about sponsorship is that the new currency is data. Would you echo that? And how is data being used? How is data being monetized from a Rugby World Cup or indeed a World Rugby perspective?
Yeah, look, I think you're right, Andy. Every conversation, and it's interesting, every conversation, as the guys have said, involves a discussion with a brand about social impact, responsibility, inclusivity, and how are these brands going to get to their own consumers and new consumers in a different way. And that is, of course, part of the conversation that leads to how are we going to help them drive those consumer touch points and be able to use data together. Again, going back to the sort of question around streaming, we need to make sure we're using the great content we can create from major events and the great content we can create from our sport to drive a relationship with the consumer. And ultimately what we're going to get back is the data on that consumer, be able to, really analyze that data, understand not just the consumer better, but our relationship with them and the type of content, the type of interaction with our sport that they're interested in. And obviously that's great because we can personalize their experience with us better, give them more of what they want ultimately, but it's allowing brands to do the same. It's allowing brands to partner with us and create a better relationship with their consumer who's also our consumer. And ultimately we're getting deeper and they're getting deeper, and that's adding value for us both. So I think we're seeing that across, for example, our more constant content of the World Rugby 7 series, where we're able to really start to personalise the experience for fans from a content and even from a match day perspective. Brilliant.
Let's turn now to Matchday Experience, Nick, and we're talking about general access fans, general entry, and also corporate support. How will the experience of fans, whether they be corporate or just fans, differ at Eden Park in, say, 3 years' time? How are you improving the fan experience?
The expectation is constantly changing, and I spent 3 hours today on a catering advisory, and our conversation was along the lines of the days of having an exclusive caterer are gone. We need to be able to bring in high street brands. We need to be able to have Uber Eats delivering 200 buckets of KFC. What are these opportunities to actually deliver alternate food offerings within the park? Fan-friendly pricing. So the days of being able to charge someone $10 for a bucket of chips are gone. we need to be able to provide a compelling experience, whether it be food related, talk about the street to the seat. Public transport's integrated into the ticketing at the park. You've got a CRL station on your doorstep. How does the train experience then complement the match day experience at the park, pre and post event? Obviously, we talk about we want to be the benchmark on the field, but also then outside the boundary. I can't influence, although I'm very proud of the All Blacks 90% winning rate at Eden Park. I don't influence that. But what I can do is influence the experience outside the field. And that's the focus for us, is to ensure that the next generation of fan is having that interaction, the engagement that is not predicated on the on-field success.
Thanks, Nick. Paul, any thoughts on enhancing the matchday experience, either for a corporate experience or indeed just the general fan?
Yes, I think everyone's touched upon it, that the demand from the consumer is changing in terms of what they want. And I can kind of give two examples of that. So we work with the Barclays Centre, the Brooklyn Nets, and they've said over the last kind of year, the demand on the Category A and hospitality is really, really changed. So they're finding those that want the Category A tickets, they're a younger audience, but they spend less time at the venue because they've got other things on. The days are kind of them going and sitting down for 2 hours for a meal before an event and then going in is gone. So it's a much more kind of grab and go, and as Nick mentioned, much more diversity in terms of what they want and what they want to consume, and not having so much time at the venue. Now, I mentioned earlier to look out the difference in the LA Clippers hospitality lounges and all their suites. Every single suite in that venue and every single hospitality lounge, you cannot see the court. You cannot see it from anywhere. So one of Steve Baumer's big things is that when the game's on, you're in your seat. And you cannot see from any of those suites. You just can't see the court. There's either a door or wall or something in the way, and create an atmosphere. And he's looked at stadiums like here. One end of the stadium is just sheer kind of seats kind of all the way up, and he's all about creating kind of atmosphere in that environment. He's almost kind of forcing people. He doesn't want the scenarios we see at just after half time of like lots of empty seats with people still in hospitalities. He's like, you're here to watch the game, and creating kind of a market environment. We know obviously Spurs have done that extremely well, but the kind of demand from the consumers change, and also from the ownership as well, where they want people in. He wants to create the best atmosphere in the NBA. But really interesting approach, something I hadn't seen before in terms of getting people in their seat and having that kind of in-seat experience.
Brilliant. I think it would be incredibly selfish of me to monopolise the panel. So I'd love to open. We got 5-10 minutes for questions, Kate? Yeah. So I'd love to open up the panel to questions. Would anyone like to ask anyone a question? Really, I've been so good at my insightful questions that I've covered everything. I can't believe that's the case. Sure? You're not going to have another chance? Thank you. Can you just introduce yourself loudly?
Neil Cunningham, Director for Rugby League World Cup Hospitality Programme. Question for Alan Gilpin. Alan, you're moving around the world, obviously, with your 7 Series. You're moving around with the World Cups and so on. How important is taking it to new markets rather than going around the old venues time and time again? How important is it to get to new markets to enhance your value?
Yeah, look, great question. Thank you. I think it is important. I think probably what we're seeing is important is that balance. So we definitely want to take World Cups, men's and women's, and the 7 Series and other major events to traditional rugby markets, because those fans also want to be able to experience those big pinnacle moments. But as we saw with Japan, if you can take a major event in a particular sport to a new territory, not that Japan was a new territory for rugby, but certainly in terms of taking our major event there, a new territory, then you have a real opportunity to grow the audiences, not just for us, but for the sport as a whole. And, whether it's Six Nations, whether it's the Rugby Championship, whether it's other competitions in our sport, they are all now more watched, more valuable, more appreciated in Japan than they probably were before. So that's important. But of course, it creates a different sort of challenge. So there's a lot more work that's needed in advance of doing that, in advance of that tournament taking place, to build that audience, to educate that audience, to create awareness, than there would be, for a World Cup that we had in 2015 in England, for example, or that we've got in 2 years' time here in France. So really important for the growth of the sport globally that we take advantage of those opportunities, but it creates a different set of challenges. And that's one of the things we look at as we talk about where we'll go in the men's edition in 2027 and 2031.
And when will that decision be made? I think it's Australia versus the USA. Is that right?
There's a few good conversations taking place. That decision's due to be made in May next year, and along with the women's 2025 discussion as well. So no, we're having some interesting dialogue.
I bet. Okay, final chance before we wrap up. No, all good. Well, it just remains for me to thank you very much, guys, for your time and your insights, and I hope to see you in the future. Thanks, everyone.